We often picture the Second World War, vast land battles, huge aerial dogfights. But beneath the waves, there was this whole other war going on, unseen mostly, silent, deadly. The U-boat war. Okay, let's submerge ourselves into this hidden conflict.
Yeah, absolutely. And to really get a feel for it, for the intensity, we're diving deep into a really powerful personal account, Iron Coffins by Herbert A. Werner. And this isn't, some high-level strategic overview. It's visceral. It's his first-hand experience as a German U-boat officer. It gives you a real look inside those, claustrophobic steel tubes.
Exactly. And our mission here for you, the learner, is to get past just the numbers, ships sunk, tonnage lost. We want to really understand the U-boat experience, the human side of it, the technology, the tactics, how they changed, and the massive psychological pressure these guys were under.
Right. And it's not just Werner remembering things years later. He was meticulous. He used his wartime notes, photos, letters he'd saved, even this German publication that listed the fate of every single U-boat. That dedication to getting it right, the depth of research, it's pretty fascinating.
Yeah, it really is.
And you also have to understand why he wrote it. He felt this huge obligation, really, to honor his comrades, thousands of them, still entombed in their U-boats at the bottom of the sea. And importantly, he deliberately avoids, the political stuff. He focuses squarely on the stark, brutal reality of war, a tragic lesson, he felt, that every generation seems to forget.
So let's get into his early days then. He wasn't dragged into it, was he? He was actually keen to join the Navy right at the start, September 39. And he wasn't totally green either. He had sailing experience, Lake Constance, even a longer trip in the Baltic and North Seas.
That initial enthusiasm, yeah, it's striking. Maybe that sense of adventure you saw a lot at the start of the war. But it definitely smacked up against reality pretty quick when he got to the officers' training center in the Baltic. That was December 1939.
Right. And even then, on the train heading to Kiel, he talks about this weird internal conflict, feeling close to death even though his life was just starting, but also ready for the ultimate sacrifice, for victory as he saw it then. That's quite a contrast.
It really highlights the power of the ideology back then, doesn't it? How it shaped young men's views on life, death, duty.
Then he gets to Kiel, the Tirpitz Pier, big place in U-boat history. And Werner, he paints this really vivid picture. You can almost smell it. Tar, salt, oil, fish, seaweed. Rows of these U-boats, and these old seasoned guards just looking the new recruits up and down, kind of wryly, like sizing them up.
Yeah, those little details, the sights, the smells, they really work. They ground you in it, make these extraordinary circumstances feel more real. You're immediately right there in that, often pretty unpleasant world of a U-boat base.
And he gets a, shall we say, damp introduction. First time stepping into his U-boat. Turns out it's U-557. He's in the control room. And whoosh, a big wave just washes right over him. The veterans thought it was hilarious, apparently. A cold, wet welcome to life at sea.
Memorable, for sure. It really underscores how unforgiving the ocean is, and maybe hints at that sort of stoicism, that dark humor you find in communities like that.
So he gives us a basic rundown of the U-boat layout. 4 pressurized compartments, diesel engines for the surface, electric motors for underwater, and the crucial bit, those batteries. They limited how long they could stay submerged, had to surface to recharge, usually every 24 hours, a real balancing act between stealth and, necessity.
That need to surface, yeah, that was their Achilles heel, increasingly. It constantly exposed them to Allied detection, radar, aircraft, a vulnerability they just couldn't fully shake.
And that vulnerability hits home terrifyingly early on. On U-557, an outboard air induction valve gets jammed. The boat just plummets, bow first, fast, down to 110 meters. Must have been absolute chaos, pure fear.
Oh, absolutely chilling. That sudden, uncontrolled dive, unable to stop the leak, it just shows the ever-present danger inside those metal tubes, completely at the mercy of the sea and the machine.
And what comes next is just incredible endurance, hours, just bailing water by hand. In appalling conditions, he describes the stench, oil, sweat, chlorine, urine, limited air, stifling, passing buckets and cans 6 hours straight, then another shift takes over. It's just this brutal picture of human resilience against potential disaster.
That description, it's so visceral. You really feel the physical strain, the mental toll, those sensory details, the awful smells, the bad air. It emphasizes just how claustrophobic and toxic that environment was. And just bailing endlessly, that must have been psychologically crushing.
And the cause of all this, a simple wrench, just jammed in the valve. Nobody knew how it got there. Almost mundane, isn't it? Shows how one tiny thing going wrong could be catastrophic.
That's such a key point. In that complex, confined space, the smallest oversight, the most random little thing could spiral into a life-or-death crisis really, really fast.
So Werner, he gradually gets used to U-boat life, learns the ropes, navigating the cramped spaces, using the facilities, and he's watching the captain, Paulson. And then, surprise, they find out they have this shared past, same school, same lake. But it doesn't mean easier treatment for Werner. Actually, the captain seems stricter with his training.
That personal link, it adds a fascinating layer, doesn't it? Humanizes the captain a bit, shows that even in that rigid military structure, personal history could matter, though maybe not in the way you'd expect. No special favors.
Right. So while U-557 is getting overhauled, Werner gets stuck with a lot of the, let's say, less glamorous jobs.
Yeah.
Navigation files, the library, such as it was typing reports, drawing these detailed diagrams of where everything was stowed. Inventory. He notices the officers tend to delegate that stuff. Gives you a peek at the non-combat logistical side of things.
Definitely. While the senior officers are focused on command strategy, it's the junior officers, the enlisted men, doing that vital, maybe less celebrated admin and maintenance that actually keeps the boat running.
Then comes the first patrol. U-557 heading out into the Atlantic. They have to get past the Shetland Islands through a British blockade.
Yeah.
And the weather is just brutal. He describes being on the bridge, constantly soaked by freezing spray. Just relentless discomfort.
Yeah, the North Atlantic weather was a constant enemy for them. Freezing cold, violent storms, huge waves. It just added another layer of hardship to an already incredibly tough job, especially for the guys on watch.
And then the tension breaks. The thrill of the chase. They spot a lone cargo ship moving fast. Werner talks about this intense hunting fever kicking in. Discomfort just vanishes. They're stalking it. Stealthily, just the tip of the conning tower showing. He mentions the freighter helped them. Unintentionally silent radio, predictable course changes. Sounds almost predatory.
That phrase, hunting fever, is really telling. It captures that intense focus, the adrenaline, that almost primal instinct that took over during an attack, and the freighter accidentally helping them. That highlights the cat-and-mouse game, exploiting any weakness you could find.
But success brings immediate danger. 3 huge underwater explosions, bang, 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 counterattack. 2 destroyers. The whole U-boat shakes violently from the depth charges, but somehow they stay watertight. Werner thinks the rough seas and being really deep help protect them. Then 3 hours of silent running, just listening, waiting, while the destroyers keep dropping charges. A deadly game of hide and seek.
Yeah, that immediate counterattack, it just hammers home the constant threat from the escorts. Depth charges were terrifyingly effective, surviving a pasting like that. Testament to the boat's strength and the crew's skill in dodging.
They have another tense run-in, this time with a big freighter. Constant flow of information, plotting its course, its speed. They've got a slight edge speed-wise. But then suddenly, the freighter changes course, unexpectedly. For 20 minutes, Werner says, it was touch and go. Really shows how dynamic these encounters were. Unpredictable.
Absolutely. Those moments highlight how critical good information, quick calculations, and frankly, a bit of luck were. One unexpected move by the target could flip the whole situation instantly.
Then something really rare happens. They encounter an enemy submarine. Alarm goes off, crash dive, everyone's glued to the sound gear, the torpedo computer. But in the end, the other sub is faster, gets away. Fascinating glimpse into that underwater duel, sub versus sub.
Encounters like that were indeed rare, but incredibly dangerous. A whole different kind of fight, needing very specialized skills in detection, tracking, underwater maneuvering.
Shifting gears a bit, Werner mentions a really significant order came down, first to U-203, but then rolled out to all U-boats, restricting night surface attacks. Why? Because it was becoming impossible to tell British escorts from U.S. ones. That must have seriously cramped their style. Hitting convoys under cover of darkness was their main tactic, right?
Absolutely. That order really reflects how much stronger Allied naval forces and their escort tactics were getting. Taking away the night surface attack, which was often the U-boat's biggest advantage, was a major blow. The German command was basically admitting the balance of power at sea was shifting.
Back on U-557, though, there's this initial burst of excitement about the German invasion of the Soviet Union, June 41. Seems there's this widespread belief in the German military that communism was the real enemy, and the pact with Stalin was just, a temporary thing. They expected a quick win in Russia. Really shows the prevailing ideology.
Yeah, that belief was powerful. It shows how the political narrative shaped thinking. For many, invading the Soviet Union seemed like the logical next step. And those early successes definitely fueled optimism, even for guys out in the Atlantic.
Soon after, U-557 gets orders. Intercept convoy BD-15. Werner describes what follows as this intense, thrilling pursuit. ends up being what looked like a perfect night for a surprise attack. Dark sky, choppy sea, ideal for a surfaced U-boat to sneak in.
You can just imagine the anticipation building on board as they closed in. These were the moments they trained for, hunted for, across those vast empty stretches of ocean.
So they surface right into the rear of the convoy. Nighttime. But immediately they spot a destroyer. Captain maneuvers quickly, avoids being seen. Visibility's poor, adds to the tension. They manage to radio the convoy's position back to base. Then they attack two big shadows, another closer phantom. Just too many targets, chaos. Order comes, fire. That's incredibly intense.
That description perfectly captures the chaos of a night surface attack on a big convoy. Hard to see, hard to identify targets, destroyers lurking everywhere, pressure to act fast. Just an extremely dangerous, high-pressure situation for the crew.
So U-557 makes it back to port. And the scene is just joyous celebration. Crowds on the docks, military band playing, the commandant greets them, nurses with flowers. Just pure elation, relief at surviving, coming home after a successful patrol.
That contrast must have been incredible, from the constant danger at sea to this hero's welcome. These homecomings were vital, a real boost after weeks of threat and hardship.
And the celebration sounds pretty big, too. Promotions, champagne, lobster, speeches, and maybe the best part, mail call. Werner really emphasizes how much getting letters from home meant. Brings home the human side, the importance of those connections for the men facing death.
Oh, absolutely. For men living with that constant possibility, letters were a lifeline, connection to family, to normalcy, essential emotional fuel, really, a reminder of what they felt they were fighting for.
U-557 goes into dry dock for maintenance. The crew gets leave, alternating weeks off in Karnak. But even ashore, the war is always there. Werner still has paperwork left over from the patrol, superiors passing tasks down, and the news keeps coming about German advances on the Eastern Front. The war shadow is inescapable.
Even in the relative safety of port, the war looms large. The news from the East, while framed positively then, was a constant reminder of the huge scale of the conflict, the massive stakes involved.
Back at sea, the danger level definitely ramps up. They have this harrowing run-in with destroyers. Multiple depth charge attacks, really intense. Hydraulic oil starts leaking, controls jam. Scary stuff. They survive, but only by diving deep, down to 200 meters. Then this tense waiting game as Allied reinforcements close in shows how much better Allied anti-sub warfare was getting.
That encounter, it vividly shows the growing threat from Allied destroyers. Their depth charging was becoming more accurate, more intense. Survival was getting much tougher for the U-boats.
They hear radio messages about other U-boat successes against convoys. The wolves are still biting. But also stories of losing contact in fog. Shows how unpredictable it all was. Success could vanish quickly.
The Wolfpack tactic, it worked well early on, but it was getting harder to pull off as Allied defenses got better. Losing contact after the first attack meant missed chances and made them more vulnerable to counterattacks, too.
On the way home, U-557 bumps into another convoy. So the hunt is back on. Weather in the North Atlantic is getting worse, too. Werner actually reflects on the Allied seamen, how persistent they are, fighting for their countries. But he seems a bit baffled by foreign crews sailing for the British. Maybe shows a kind of narrow, nationalistic view.
That perspective is interesting, isn't it? It perhaps highlights a limited understanding of the bigger picture, the global opposition to the Axis powers.
Anyway, this second patrol ends up being pretty successful. U-557 sinks 3 ships. They were part of a bigger battle involving 3 convoys. Huge Allied losses overall. You can sense the pride they felt in the Wolfpack tactics working.
Those early U-boat successes were significant, no doubt. Those big convoy battles really hurt Allied shipping. The coordinated Wolfpack approach was key to those early victories.
Back in port again, there's the routine ceremonial dinner, a bit of tradition. Later, Werner's on night watch on the quiet, moored U-boat. And he reflects on how important the boat feels to him, almost like part of himself. Shows that deep bonds submariners developed with their vessels, their lifeline.
The U-boat became their whole world, didn't it? Home, weapon, survival pod, all rolled into one. That deep connection was probably essential psychologically for coping.
U-557 then gets stripped down for a major refit. Crew gets better living quarters ashore for a bit. Werner really savors the simple things first. Proper shave in weeks. A hot shower. Highlights just how rough life was out at sea.
Those small comforts, a shave, a hot shower. They seem trivial, but after weeks of deprivation and grime on the boat, they must have felt like pure luxury, underscores the harsh reality of U-boat life.
But amidst the relative comfort, sobering news arrives. U-47 is lost. That's Günther Prien's boat, a huge ace. and U-556 too, Wolfart, another successful commander. The realization hits. Even the best, the most experienced, the aces, they weren't safe. Werner notes that grim paradox, the U-boat war made heroes fast, but it destroyed them just as quickly. Stark reminder of the horrific attrition rate.
Losing commanders like Prian and Wolfart, decorated heroes, that must have been a massive shock. A brutal reminder that no one was invincible. Allied anti-submarine efforts were really starting to bite, even against the best.
Werner gets promoted, put in charge of the third watch, more responsibility. On the next patrol, they encounter a destroyer. But the decision is made. Prioritize the supply ships, don't tangle with the escort unless you have to. Reflects the core strategy, right? Disrupt the logistics.
Exactly. That was the primary goal. Sink merchant ships, cripple the enemy supply lines. Engaging warships was risky, didn't always serve the main objective. Avoid the fight if you can hit the cargo.
They return to Lorient. Big, welcoming crowd again. But he notes the usual établissement girls aren't there, security's tighter. Still, the social life ashore is vital for the crew to blow off steam.
That social release in port was absolutely crucial. A way to cope with the constant tension, the psychological stress. Tighter security probably reflected growing worries about spies, maybe the general war situation too.
Admiral Donitz himself comes to visit the flotilla, hands out lots of medals. Werner doesn't know it then, but it's the last time he'll see the crew of U-557 together. Poignant detail highlights how fleeting those bonds were with the high casualties.
It really underscores that tragic reality, doesn't it? The high attrition. Friendships forged in extreme danger could be broken so abruptly. Goodbyes were often final, even if you didn't realize it at the time.
While in Brest, Werner meets a Frenchwoman, Yvonne. A brief personal connection amidst the war's brutality. Just a reminder that individual lives, emotions carried on somehow.
Those brief relationships ashore, they offered a vital, if temporary, escape. A moment of normalcy, human connection, for men constantly staring death in the face.
But during a conversation back in Brest, you sense this growing unease about the war expanding onto multiple fronts. Going home on leave brings comfort, but his father asks probing questions about U-boat life. Werner seems reluctant to share the full horror, trying to shield his family, maybe?
That unease, yeah, it reflects a growing sense, even far from the land battles, that the strategic situation for Germany was getting worse, and wanting to protect your family from the grim realities. Very natural reaction.
Then Werner gets transferred to U-612 for training exercises back in the Baltic. Relatively safer waters. He actually says he's bored with training, eager to get back to combat. Shows how that intense danger could become addictive almost, for some.
For some, yeah, the high-stakes environment of combat, despite the risks, might have felt more meaningful, more engaging than routine training. A strong pull to be where the action was.
But then, disaster strikes, even in training. August 6th, a catastrophic collision with another submerged U-boat. Sudden impact, the other boat sinking fast, men trapped. Werner describes the chaos escaping U-612, showing leadership getting his crew out. Shocking proof that danger was everywhere, even away from the front lines.
Horrifying accident. It just underlines the inherent risks of operating submarines, period. Confined spaces, potential for technical failure, human error. Disaster could happen with terrifying speed, even in safe waters.
The aftermath is grim. Crew missing from the other boat. U-612's captain is furious, understandably. The search finds only drifting life jackets. Haunting. Investigation blames human error, bad navigation, missed current, not using sound gear properly. 2 men dead, a whole submarine lost because of mistakes. Harsh lesson about procedure, vigilance.
Such a tragedy. And a stark reminder, you absolutely had to follow procedures to the letter. Even small lapses, failure to use the equipment right, could have devastating consequences.
And adding to the weirdness on U-612, there's this bizarre case of a cook who deserts. Starts with petty theft, escalates. He steals the navigator's gun, bolts. Werner ends up hunting him down almost personally. Finds the cook blinded after a failed suicide attempt. Strange, tragic story. Speaks volumes about the extreme pressure people were under.
That's a deeply unsettling episode. Highlights the intense psychological strain, the desperation that could push individuals to extremes in that environment.
Werner then reflects on his own narrow escape from the collision. A near-death experience that must have really shaken him and the rest of his crew.
Surviving something like that, yeah, it would definitely leave a mark. Maybe a deeper appreciation for being alive, or at least just a constant gnawing sense of how dangerous their job was.
He gets some leave, goes home for his sister Trudy's wedding. Nearly Constance, familiar ground. The peace and quiet there must have been such a jarring contrast to the brutality he was living at sea. A brief return to a world the war hadn't quite touched in the same way.
Those moments of leave were precious, weren't they? A vital link to life outside the war, a reminder of what was at stake personally. But that contrast between peaceful home and harsh reality must have been incredibly stark.
Meanwhile, the technology war at sea keeps churning.
Yeah.
Allies are getting much better with air surveillance, radar, big threat to surface U-boats. So the Germans counter with the Met's radar warning receiver. It's this constant back and forth, this technological arms race between hunter and hunted.
The Allies getting good radar really changed the game. It turned the U-boats' need to surface from an advantage into a huge vulnerability. Metox was the German response, trying to level the playing field again, shows that constant technological battle.
Werner gets back to active duty on a new boat, U-230. Captains eager for action as soon as they spot a convoy. That hunting fever again. Seems like a powerful motivator for these commanders.
That drive to engage, to get a kill, it remained strong for many U-boat crews and commanders. Despite the risks, that desire for action was just part of the U-boat arms character.
Then something utterly chaotic happens. U-230 surfaces right in the middle of a huge Allied convoy. A massive upsurge of water just pushes them up. Suddenly they're surrounded. Hunter becomes the hunted in the worst possible way. Terrifying scenario.
Just an extraordinarily dangerous situation. Totally exposed, immediate threat from multiple ships. Surviving that needed incredibly fast thinking, decisive action, and probably a whole lot of luck.
A huge cargo ship, 10,000 tons, explodes right nearby. Massive blast. And they realize destroyers are everywhere. Desperate order, clear the bridge, means attack is imminent. Just a terrifying, vivid picture of naval warfare's destructive power.
Being that close to the explosion, seeing the destroyers, incredibly hazardous. That urgent order to clear the bridge just screams immediate danger, get under cover now.
Then come multiple air attacks, one after another. And frustratingly, the new Madoc's radar warning isn't giving them enough warning. Bombs land close, cause damage. The British have basically thrown this tight net of aircraft over the Bay of Biscay. So the new tactic is stay submerged during the day, only service at night. But even nights are getting dangerous now. Constant hunter-killer groups. The air war is intensifying dramatically.
Yeah, Allied air power was becoming dominant. Those coordinated hunter-killer groups made life incredibly difficult for U-boats. They were vulnerable on the surface and increasingly even when submerged. Maddox helped, but it clearly wasn't foolproof.
Back in Brest, Werner tries to find some escape in the social scene. Lively party at a photographer's place. Gets closer to Janine. Those moments of connection, respite, they seem more and more vital as the war grinds on.
That social life in port, it was a necessary escape valve. Temporary relief from the immense pressure, the constant danger. Personal connections offered a vital bit of normalcy amid all the death and destruction.
But even then, there's that quiet last night in port before the next patrol. Troubling thoughts about the future creep in. Filing his testament, usually routine, suddenly feels heavy. Like signing his own life away, he says. Shows a growing sense of foreboding. The psychological wear and tear.
That really reflects a growing awareness, doesn't it? The danger was increasing, the odds were getting worse. Preparing a will must have been a deeply unsettling ritual by then, a stark reminder of their own mortality.
Life at sea is now completely flipped. Day and night reversed, constantly dodging planes, always listening for enemy ships. The hunter is definitely the hunted now, always on the defensive, just trying to survive.
Allied air dominance forced that change. Couldn't operate safely on the surface anymore, even at night. Meant much more time submerged, which severely limited their speed, range, effectiveness. They were being squeezed.
And finally, attack orders come through. Eastbound convoy. The old cycle starts again, intense preparation for combat. A reminder of the mission, despite the mounting danger.
Even with the heavy losses, the worsening odds, they still got orders, and they still carried them out. Shows that ingrained sense of duty, commitment to the fight, even when things looked bleak.
They approach the convoy at dawn. Werner notes the sky is blood red, ominous sign maybe, and the soundtrack to this attack is grim. Constant ASDIC pings from the Allied ships searching for them, distant rumbles of depth charges, the thrum of their own engines, creates this atmosphere of intense, impending conflict.
Those sensory details, yeah, they really put you there. The sounds of battle, enemy searching, your own boat. It creates this palpable sense of imminent danger, heightened tension.
They're getting the torpedo tubes ready. Then a sudden frantic shout destroyer right there. Looks like it's coming in to ram. Immediate emergency deep dive. Werner describes the terrifying sound of the destroyer's hull scraping right overhead. Incredibly close call. Razor-thin margin for survival.
Being rammed was a huge threat during convoy attacks. Required lightning-fast reactions, precise maneuvering to avoid getting crushed. A truly terrifying moment.
What follows is just a relentless barrage of depth charges. A new group of escorts joins in. They're helpless, pinned down at 265 meters. Crushing depth, hours of just enduring it. Physical agony, mental torture, terrible conditions inside, flooding, foul air, diesel fumes, humidity, just waiting.
Wow.
It's been psychologically brutal.
Those prolonged attacks were designed to break the crew, not just the boat. Physically and mentally. Stuck down there, damaged, foul air, oxygen running low. It took an immense toll.
Finally, after 35 agonizing hours submerged under constant attack, they surface. And the contrast. The beauty, the quiet of the night sky, the ocean. It is almost unbelievable after the hell they just went through. Palpable relief, disbelief at surviving, powerful moment.
That surfacing, it highlights that stark contrast. Claustrophobic terror below, vast serenity above, the sheer relief, the disbelief at cheating death against those odds must have been overwhelming.
But it doesn't last. Another severe bombardment, over 300 depth charges this time. Astonishingly, U-230 survives again, down to 280 meters. The resilience of these boats and the crews. It's just incredible under that kind of pressure.
Surviving that kind of massive, concentrated attack is just wow. Testament to the boat's construction, definitely, but also the crew's skill and sheer determination to hold it together under unimaginable stress.
Now they face a truly grim choice. Air is running out. Suicide or surrender. Captain orders one last desperate attempt, try to surface, but that just brings more attacks from the escorts. The battered U-230 levels off near its absolute crush depth, around 300 meters. Then silence. After the last explosions, just silence. For over an hour, utter exhaustion, uncertainty, maybe a tiny sliver of hope.
That was the absolute breaking point, wasn't it? Lack of air forces, a potentially fatal move, trying to surface, getting attacked again, relentless pressure, and then that silence. Must have been both a huge relief and deeply unsettling. What now?
They make it back to port. The grim routine begins again, stripping the boat. News comes in. Another U-boat, U-634, arrived late. Battered. Werner's interaction with his captain feels different now. A shared understanding of the brutality, maybe a growing weariness.
That shared experience of survival forged this powerful, often unspoken bond. Seeing U-634 come in late, damaged, it spoke volumes about the dangers out there, deepened that sense of camaraderie, mutual understanding of what they were all facing.
Werner tries to cope by throwing himself into the hot and fast life in port, trying to forget the constant threat, the trauma. A common coping mechanism, perhaps, but maybe not sustainable.
That kind of hedonistic, live-for-the-moment lifestyle was pretty common. A way to temporarily escape the pressure, the uncertainty, living intensely as a defense against the constant possibility of not coming back.
Then, unexpected transfer orders come through. Leads to a rushed, bittersweet reunion with his sister Trudy and parents. While home, he finds out his father's been arrested by the Gestapo. Werner takes immediate action, manages to get him released. Shows his courage, but also the Gestapo's reach, even into naval officers' families.
That episode really highlights the dangers weren't just at the front. Civilians in Germany faced threats too. Werner, acting to save his father, underscores the fear, the abuse of power by the Gestapo regime.
He returns to Frankfurt, his family home, and he's confronted by horrific destruction from Allied bombing. Then the devastating news. Marianne is dead. The Hardenberg family, friends, disappeared. He describes feeling emotionally numb. Shock. It drives him back to the grim familiarity of his U-boat. The personal cost of the war hits him incredibly hard.
Just devastating personal blows, losing loved ones, seeing his home destroyed. It brings the tragedy of the war right into sharp focus for him, that numbness. Likely shock, a way to cope with overwhelming grief.
Back with the crew, he's dealing with discipline problems. Sign of the strain everyone's under. And then, bizarrely, a staff photographer shows up. Surreal. Maybe an attempt by the Navy to keep documenting things for propaganda, even as the tide turned against them.
The photographer showing up then. Yeah, it suggests the Navy was still trying to manage morale, create propaganda images, even as the strategic situation was falling apart.
Then completely new, unexpected orders. A mission to Chesapeake Bay. America. Really daring. Means operating mostly on the surface because it's shallow. And they have to carry mines instead of a full load of torpedoes. Radical shift in tactics. Location. Shows desperation creep again.
Operating on the surface in enemy coastal waters. Incredibly risky by then, with Allied air superiority. This mission definitely signals the German command was grasping at straws, trying anything to disrupt the Allies.
They have this chaotic fight with British aircraft while surfaced with other U-boats. They actually managed to shoot down a Sunderland flying boat. Shows they still had fight left in them, but also highlights the danger of being caught on the surface.
Despite being increasingly outgunned, yeah, the U-boat crews fought back hard when attacked, showed resilience, determination, even against the odds.
They actually make it to the U.S. coast undetected. Lay eggs, as Werner puts it, plant mines near Norfolk. Bold mission, but probably more symbolic than strategically impactful at that point. Yeah.
Getting there undetected was quite an achievement, but the actual impact of laying a few mines, likely minimal in the grand scheme of the war.
While off the U.S. coast, they start hearing more and more distress calls from other U-boats back in the Bay of Biscay. Constant reminder of the danger zone closer to home. They try to rendezvous with a U-tanker for fuel, but it's frustrating, ultimately fails. Shows the growing logistical nightmare for the U-boats. Fuel was becoming critical.
Those increasing distress calls from Biscay really signaled the heavy losses being suffered there and the problems refueling at sea. Showed how Allied efforts were squeezing German supply lines, making sustained operations harder and harder.
Instead of the tanker, U-230 runs into their old acquaintance Dahlhaus in his battered U-634. Just underscores how few operational boats were left, the shared hardship.
That chance meeting, yeah, it highlights the dwindling numbers out there in the vast Atlantic, a shared sense of attrition, difficulty among the remaining crews.
Back in Brest again. Werner hears rumors Janine might be leaving. Then the big news. Italy surrenders. Major blow to the Axis. The noose is tightening around Germany. Situation clearly deteriorating fast.
Italy's surrender was huge. Weakened the Axis significantly, increased the pressure on Germany from another direction. A real turning point.
There's a brief moment of success. They hit a convoy using a new homing torpedo. But that's overshadowed by the incredibly dangerous trip back through the Bay of Biscay. Constant air attacks. Survival odds seem to be shrinking with every patrol.
Homing torpedoes were a technological step up, sure. But Allied air power in the Bay of Biscay was just overwhelming by then. Made any transit, surface, or submerged incredibly dangerous.
They finally make it to their pickup point after a hellish passage, only to be greeted by a massive Allied air raid on Brest itself. Werner watches the assault, sees Allied planes shot down, burning. Stark picture of the ferocious air war hitting the bases now.
Those intensifying air raids on bases like Brest really crippled U-boat operations. Damaged infrastructure, constant threat to boats and personnel, made it hard to function.
During the chaos, Werner encounters a wounded American pilot. Brief exchange. The American is totally confident. Time works for us. Werner reflects on that, maybe starting to see the writing on the wall. Poignant clash of views on how the war would end.
That little encounter says a lot. The American pilot's certainty reflects the growing Allied confidence in victory. Werner, mulling it over, suggests a dawning, maybe reluctant, acceptance of Germany's worsening position.
U-230 gets orders. Sail towards Gibraltar. They see heavily armed British warships guarding the Med entrance. Narrowly escape being spotted by a plane. The Mediterranean's basically closed to them now.
By that stage, yeah, the Allies totally controlled the Med. It was no longer a viable hunting ground for U-boats. Too dangerous.
Werner acknowledges the devastating losses the U-boat fleet has suffered. Allies have achieved supremacy at sea. He gets transferred again to a smaller coastal boat, U-415, still in Brest. He notes the atmosphere in the U-boat pens has changed. Palpable sense of decline, desperation.
The staggering U-boat losses, Allied dominance. It was the decisive turning point in the Battle of the Atlantic. Morale in the U-boat arm must have plummeted. The strategic outlook was just bleak.
He gets back from a patrol to find his own apartment in Brest damaged by bombing. Grim task of cleaning up. He reflects on the war's impact, the contrast between victors and defeated. Still clings to a fragile hope for victory, despite the pessimism. Shows how ingrained beliefs, propaganda, could hang on.
Even with defeat staring them in the face, many clung to hope. Maybe a miracle weapon, maybe something. A psychological defense, perhaps, against confronting the grim reality.
Conversations with other officers turned to the disaster on the Eastern Front. But still, talk of miracle weapons changing everything, a recurring theme of denial.
Yeah, that desperate hope for some game-changing new weapon was common, a way to avoid facing the overwhelming military reality.
He goes home to Frankfurt again. Horrific, widespread destruction from bombing. But he finds his family alive, miraculously survived. Relief, but the scale of the destruction is visceral.
Seeing his own city devastated like that brings the war's impact home in a brutal way. Finding his family safe amidst that must have been an incredible, rare moment of relief against a backdrop of tragedy.
Werner takes command of U-415, learns its previous captain, Winter, was a big ace, respected figure. Some brief training exercises follow.
Winter having that reputation would give him significant authority. Werner getting his boat suggests the command still had confidence in Werner's abilities, despite everything.
U-415 heads towards the English Channel, immediately runs into active Allied hunter-killer groups. The Allies really control those waters now. Werner himself makes a mistake, leaves the periscope up too long. Leads to a terrifyingly close depth charge attack. Humbling reminder. Even experienced guys weren't immune to errors under pressure.
Even seasoned officers like Werner could slip up under that constant stress. That near miss is a stark reminder. Anti-submarine warfare was unforgiving. One brief lapse could be fatal.
Then, unexpectedly recalled from patrol. Word is, Supreme Command expects the Allied invasion in May. Lots of debate, uncertainty about where they'll land. Shows how well the Allies kept the secret.
By then, yeah, the Allied invasion buildup is obvious. German command was braced for it, just didn't know exactly where or when. High alert, high tension.
The briefing that follows is just shocking. The order. U-boats are to attack the invasion fleet, sink everything, if necessary, ram enemy ships. Werner describes the disbelief, the grim acceptance among the captains. He thinks it's futile, especially with so few boats having snorkels for submerged approach. Sounds like a suicidal last stand order.
That order,
Yeah.
it just screams desperation. Ramming ships highlights the lack of effective options left, a willingness to accept catastrophic losses in one final, hopeless attempt to stop the invasion.
Then the news breaks. June 6, 1944. Allied landings in Normandy. Catches them somewhat off guard in Brest. Werner calmly heads to the bunker. Feels like he won't be going back to his boat. Winter's farewell is somber. The image he paints is powerful. 15 U-boats heading out in the heavily defended Bay of Brest. 7 modern snorkel boats dive, vanish. The other 8, older boats like Werner's U-415, follow a minesweeper out onto the surface under the moonlight. Courageous defiance, but also impending doom against overwhelming odds.
D-Day, the turning point in the West. The U-boat sailing out was brave, yes, but ultimately a symbolic gesture against the massive Allied force assembled for the invasion.
The narrative then jumps towards the end. Enemy planes hammer the exposed U-boats in the channel. Werner gets inexperienced officers as replacements. Germany's scraping the bottom of the barrel. U-415, battered as it is, declared fit for another patrol. News from home. Trudy's pregnant. Werner worries about his father going back to a dangerous town. Little snippets of life carrying on amidst the collapse.
Those final stages. The U-boat force was just being decimated. Catastrophic losses, inexperienced crews. Those personal notes from home just highlight the enduring human concerns, even as the right crumbled.
Winter tells Werner about some vague, special task, need for more repairs. Then a big explosion in the bunker area, unexplained. The assassination attempt on Hitler happens, but surprisingly little impact on Navy routine. Werner gets appointed captain of U-953, a modern snorkel boat. Previous captain, Marbach, didn't return. Lost.
Just chaos and desperation in those final months. The failed Hitler plot, a significant event, but didn't change much for the frontline forces. Werner getting a newer boat shows they were still trying to use what little they had left.
Things in Brest are falling apart fast. Allies closing in. HQ sends a late order, evacuate U-boats. But the British blockade is tight, air attacks relentless. Escape seems impossible. Only 2 boats left operational in Brest. Werner's U-953 and U-247, which is soon lost too.
The Allied encirclement of bases like Brest trapped the remaining U-boats. Trying to break out under that naval and air pressure was incredibly perilous.
U-953 is barely seaworthy. Damaged, limited repairs, orders come, no torpedoes. Instead, transport vital engineering gear and technicians south to La Rochelle, another German-held port. Werner decides to take the surviving crew of his old boat, U-415 too. Compassionate move. Desperate French civilians try to get aboard, wanting to escape the Allies. Shows the chaos.
That reflects the total disintegration of German control, trying to salvage key people, equipment. The civilians pleading to get on board underscores the fear, the chaos of the liberation.
Departures delayed to take on more technicians. Winter gives a final somber farewell as air road sirens wail. Intense bombing of Brest follows. U-953 makes this incredibly difficult escape, navigating treacherous coastal waters, dodging patrols, finally reaching open sea. Testament to Werner's skill, crew's resilience, and sheer luck.
Escaping a heavily bombarded, blockaded port like Brest, extremely dangerous, required exceptional seamanship, plus a huge slice of luck to evade everything.
They continue along the continental shelf, relying almost entirely on the snorkel to stay hidden. Then, inevitably, the first diesel engine breaks down. Send a coded message. Situation perilous, heavy enemy presence, strong defenses, damage mounting. Brief, risky surface encounter with another U-boat. Werner notes the contrast. Their boat is battered. The other captain makes some cynical crack about his own boat being a harem. Conditions inside U-953 after weeks submerged become unbearable. Stench of unwashed body, stale air, diesel.
Mechanical failures, constant snorkel use, shows the strain on the boats, the crews. That brief encounter with another U-boat gives a grim snapshot of the fleet's state, the declining morale.
The tough journey continues. Through Norwegian fjords towards Bergen, constant alert for British torpedo boats, planes, then the equally dangerous trip north to Trondheim. Werner describes this internal struggle, decides to subtly resist the Nazi regime, selects trusted men for a small conspiracy basically, planning to surrender eventually. The dire situation of German forces, the appalling U-boat losses, are weighing on him.
As defeat became inevitable and the regime's nature clearer, some military figures did start contemplating resistance, or at least not fighting to the suicidal end. The catastrophic U-boat losses definitely fueled disillusionment.
He reports to Captain Rosing in Norway. Gets told U-953 isn't ready for the mythical Great Offensive they still talk about. Abruptly reassigned again to another boat in Kristiansand. Dönitz issues this final, defiant order. All conventional U-boats leave Germany, continue the hopeless fight from Norway, leadership refusing to face reality.
Dönitz clinging to fighting on from Norway even as Germany collapsed. Pure fanaticism, denial at the highest levels.
Werner gets top-secret papers to deliver around Norway, then the historic news, Hitler's dead, Dönitz is his successor, last gasp attempt at order.
Momentous events signaling the final, chaotic end of the Third Reich. Dönitz taking over was a desperate move to maintain some structure.
He reaches Kristiansand, meets Angerman, captain of a new Type X-SAW U-boat. Advanced tech. Angerman paints a horrifying picture of Germany. Berlin fallen, Kiel captured. Werner sees German POWs being treated brutally, forced nudity. Profound disillusionment sets in while waiting for discharge. Tries farming briefly, gets recaptured by other ex-prisoners. Post-war is imprisonment, then unbelievably forced reenlistment in a tiny post-war German Navy.
Werner's post-war time reflects that widespread chaos, suffering after the collapse, harsh POW treatment, difficulty readjusting, common experiences for many German soldiers.
And then the narrative brings home the devastating personal cost.
Yeah.
After the war, he learns his sister Trudy, both parents, died in an air raid on Darmstadt. As to the earlier losses of Marianne, Yvonne, just profound personal tragedy layered onto the wider devastation.
Just immense personal loss marking his post-war life. Tragic consequence of the violence. Losing his whole immediate family underscores the human cost that went far beyond the battlefield.
So as we surface from this deep dive into Werner's Iron Coffins, what are the big takeaways? It's just this raw, unflinching look at U-boat warfare, isn't it?
Yeah.
The constant strain, physical and mental, the relentless tech race, the tide turning dramatically as the Allies gained the upper hand, and that shift from initial enthusiasm to realizing it was a lost cause.
Exactly. And his personal story just drives home the immense human costs, not just for him or the thousands lost in their iron coffins, but for his family, for Germany. His reason for writing seems clear: honor the fallen, and just underscore the profound tragedy of war itself.
Yeah. So here's a final thought for you, the learner, maybe unsettling. Thinking about Werner's experiences and how much naval warfare tech has changed since WWII. What are the human elements that haven't changed? How has technology maybe transformed conflict at sea, but also maybe failed to change that core human experience: fear, resilience, loss? It's crucial, isn't it, to look beyond the stats, remember the individual stories, the human costs like the one Herbert Werner shared so vividly.